As a teenager, young William Vanstone caught a boy scrumping apples from his father's vicarage garden. As he grabbed the boy by the wrist, he was shocked by the wrist's thinness. And then he was deeply moved by the boy's plea that he'd only taken the apples because he was so hungry. Teenage Vanstone resolved at that point that his life would hereafter be given to helping alleviate the needs of the poorest in society, just like that boy he'd just apprehended. For him, his career became as a parish priest and as a theologian. And as he worked out his ministry in parish ministry, what he thought was the chief role and purpose of the church and of a priest became apparent to him very swiftly, needed to be very different in a post-war context, particularly about how the church reflects the reality and nature of God, how the church might respond in its being to the nature of God, resulted in a book which ends in the hymn that we're going to be singing at the end of this address. And if I may speak personally, a book that was responsible in large part for my own journey to the place where I find myself standing tonight. Love's Endeavour, Love's Expense was the title of the book, and it blew the mind of a young undergraduate because of the entirely new way in which it expressed for me the nature of God, and crucially, how God is at work in all that is created. Vanstone's testimony is to a God who pours God's self into all that is, a continual endeavour of utterly costly love. And when I put it that way, it possibly makes it not sound too mind-blowing, not in the way that it once blew my mind. And I suppose that's because I've always been oppressed by a rather remote, monarchical, public school kind of God image, a headmasterly, grand, parental, mildly interested, occasionally disapproving sort of God. I don't know what your God image is. Maybe very different from what I was oppressed by for so long. But what Vanstone showed me was an utterly different model of God. Vulnerable, intimate, passionate, utterly committed. I suppose, in other words, the God of Jesus of Nazareth. I suppose I learned to see God differently through that book, learned to be able to lift my eyes to look into the face of a God before whom, until that point, I'd only been able to stand with head bowed and eyes downcast, my first words being, sorry. Tonight's gospel is a hinge point in the narrative of John. Those inquisitive Greeks, they're always looking for something new, some new wisdom, some new insight, some new gnosis. They're among the first into Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. They have heard, and now they want to see. Last night's gospel spoke of the supper at Bethany after the raising of Lazarus, when Mary anointed Jesus' feet with precious nard. And the gospel ended with the ominous epilogue, the intention of the authorities to do away with Lazarus as well, because they perceive threat. They cannot see a living sign of God at work in Jesus. All they can perceive is that Lazarus also represents a threat to the established order. Perhaps the Greeks had heard the story of the raising of Lazarus. We'll never know. But their request names Philip. So we would see Jesus. One of those phrases that echoes down the centuries, challenging preachers and theologians and junior church leaders to this very day. Sir, we would see Jesus. And Jesus, the minute he hears this, knows that if the word has gone as far as these inquiring Greeks, then his time has come. and that soon the time for speaking and working will be past, and the time for waiting and being handed over and done to is very near. At the wedding at Cana to his mother, his message had been clear: my time has not yet come, but now it has. And the word he uses for what's about to happen is glorify. Glorify. Chosen precisely because of the nature of God that the next few days are so painfully about to make manifest. Just as Vanstone's book brought me to my knees 30-something years ago by the description of a God who utterly empties himself into creative love, holding nothing back, expanding all for the sake of that which is created, so also Jesus, and therefore God, hands over himself, all that he is, to the forces of darkness. The word love is so overused in our culture, and yet in the next few days, expressed in its starkest terms, we will see its meaning. We will see its meaning made visible. We know perhaps all too much in our own lives what masquerades as love in its falsity, when it's characterized by limitation, by control, by detachment. That's what limited love looks like. The utter authenticity of love is about to be revealed to us. Love that washes feet, love that forgives, love that kneels alone and weeps, love that says, today you will be with me in paradise. Limitless, precarious, vulnerable love. So if last night I asked you if smell could take you back to a precious memory of childhood, so now tonight I ask you, when in your life have you perceived, but then needed to see truly? When have you perceived threat or difference as other and scary? When have you not been able to see truly something good at work? Or put it the other way, when have you seen something that felt on the face of it good and true and enticing, but experience has taught you that something is happening that is not good? When have you needed to move from a surface level of perception to costly and painful true-sightedness? Because if you've ever known a time like that, then tonight's gospel is for you. If you would see Jesus, then how must you look? Let me tell you about my black angel. I'd been given the chance of a job. I turned down 2 curacies in 2 different dioceses. I do not recommend it because I'd been promptly released. That means let go politely. My last chance was in the Diocese of Southwark. And it brought me to Streatham, a place I had never been, at 5 minutes to 6 on a cold December evening, with 5 minutes to find the bishop's house in Tootingbeck Gardens, with no idea where Tootingbeck Gardens was, this being before the days of sat-nav and mobile phones and Google Maps. Can I help you, mate? A Rastafarian stood before me, complete with dreadlocks, denim and leather. This oh so inexperienced middle-class boy quailed, was terrified, wanted to turn and run in the other direction. Maybe you've never been like that before someone different. I was. I'm looking for Tootingbeck Gardens, number 38. Oh, I know where that is. I'll take you there. Quickest way is through this graveyard. Through the graveyard. Images of my battered body being found next day. As he took me through the graveyard, He told me a bit about Streatham, gave me a potted history of its varied past, pointed out the house where Cynthia Payne had run her famous luncheon vouchers club, deposited me on the doorstep of Bishop's house at precisely 6 o'clock, saying, "I don't know what you're here for, mate, but good luck." The bishop opened the door, said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I said, "I think I've seen an angel." He said, "You better come in." I told him my story. He said, "You really need to grow up, don't you?" He said, "I'm going to send you to a parish where you will learn to see." How have you needed to change from perception to sight in your life? How has what you've suffered and lost and let go of changed you to see more deeply, more truly? I'm still trying to learn how to see my God as my God probably truly is, when I'm not oppressed by my negative imagery and my guilt. With wonderful humility, Vanstone encapsulates all of his theology in the hymn that I'm going to ask you to sing in a moment. Will you please stay sitting for it? Will you sing it quietly? Will you let its meaning sink into you? And will you particularly concentrate on the last 2 verses? Therefore, he who thee reveals hangs, O Father, on that tree, helpless, and the nails and thorns tell of what thy love must be. Thou art God, no monarch thou, throned in easy state to reign. Thou art God, whose arms of love, aching, spent, the world sustain.